All right. So this is the first episode of Reality Philosophy. Forgive me for the kind of microphone stuff. I'm still figuring out the sound engineering side, so it might sound a little boxy. The basic structure is that I'm going to cover a lot of like intellectual type channels, talk about political philosophy, etc. Interesting enough, Grok is my main AI chatbot system. And it says, I ask Grok, okay, give me a list of intellectual channels. And it says, came up with a whole list. And then, it had the basic parameters and all that kind of stuff. And then, okay, come up with, list of like lesser known channels, and, gave me another list. And then ask for another list of like kind of pseudoscience bullshit channels, places that pretend to be like, oh, this is, the truth, and came up with that list. So then I mixed it all kind of together, turned it into two different lists of just high popularity, low popularity, purely based on YouTube subscriber like channel counts. So we're going to go through a high, popularity number and then a low popularity number. And then I've got a little metric here about, how to go through these bit by bit. We'll pause the videos and analyze kind of the truth value along the way. And then, various other things that, obviously would make this, more interesting. So just going to get started. I've got a list, high population or high popularity. This is the one with 262. So we're going to do, this is the one, random number generator, 262, enter, generate, number 124. All right, number 24, 124. Who's that? Mathologer. Who the hell is Mathologer? All right, spit that into, we're going to be covering spirit science at some point. Mathologer Ramnanujan. What the fuck is this? Mathologer? Hold up. Set that back. Mathologer. Okay, it's got 963,000 subscribers. That's pretty big. All right. What are we staring at? I'm gonna try to pick something that, relatively short. Oh, I gotta give myself a timer. Only wanted to give like at most 30 minutes a piece. So what is this? Power of ABAB. This is just like a pure math channel. My purpose of all this is trying to like basically review what people consider intellectual and whether or not it's got, any value whatsoever. Um, recommend the subscription for the YouTube channel if it's any good. This one, not a great start. RNG kind of killed me on this one. The whole point is the like trying to figure out what type of YouTube channel it is and the strength of the truth statements. So I'm trying to pick something that's something I can at least chew on. All right, 30 minutes. And I will
Welcome
be
to another Mathologer
speeding up the video, slowing it down, depending on, content. So
video. Have you heard of vortex maths or the 369 Tesla code? I have to admit, in half a century of obsessing about mathematics, I'd never come across these terms until quite recently. That's what comes up when you search for the combination 369 Tesla on YouTube. A pile of seriously viral videos.
What's happening?
7 million views. Not bad, huh?
And it's buffering something. Oh, crud. What happened? Can't handle recording and YouTube navigation at the same time. That's not good. Was kind of hoping this shit would work. That's still working. Uh-oh. Video. This whole page is down.
As with all of these images.
Ah. Okay. We're back.
Welcome to another Mathologer video. Have you heard of vortex maths or the 369 Tesla code? I have to admit that in half a century of obsessing about mathematics, I'd never come across these terms until quite recently. That's what comes up when you search for the combination 369 Tesla on YouTube. A pile of seriously viral videos.
What
7
is
million
this?
views. Not bad, huh? A lot of these videos feature a curious diagram in their thumbnails. This diagram is usually referred to as the vortex and is one of the main topics covered in these videos. You've all heard of Nikola Tesla, the genius inventor of the Tesla coil and other early electrical devices, right? The Tesla car, that Tesla. But did you know that Tesla also had a host of idiosyncrasies centered around the number 3? For example, Tesla would walk 3 times around a block before entering a building. He would only stay in hotel rooms with a room number divisible by 3,
what
and
are
so
we even
on.
talking about?
In general, he was
part of the breakdown that I'm trying to do is like, if it's going to make an argumentative point, what is the thesis? And trying to steelman them as much as possible. Be like, okay, this is the point that they're trying to make. And then, of course, do they address the kind of strongest counter arguments? Are they steelmanning their opponents, their opposition in whatever they're saying?
Convinced that the numbers 3, 6, and 9 hold the key to the universe. According to the champions of vortex maths, the vortex is that key. That sounds a bit nuts. But as I said, I've never heard of vortex mathematics, and so I was curious to find out more. And 7 million people can't be wrong, right? Also, although vortex math was new to me, I'd already stumbled across the vortex diagram before in a different context.
Still too slow.
Our mission today is to have a closer look at the vortex. There, 9 points on a circle labeled 1 to 9, innocent enough. Then there's this infinity-shaped loop connecting 6 of the points. The remaining 3 points, 3, 6, and 9, form an equilateral triangle, and depending on which video you watch, some extra lines get added like this, or like this, or like this. The last version of the diagram is the one that I have been familiar with for many years. It's part of a famous sequence of diagrams, one diagram for each positive integer. This sequence of diagrams starts out like this. There's a diagram for 1, for 2, for 3, for 4, for 5, and so on. 9, that's the vortex, and then things continue like this.
See, when you're doing a basic, presentation or that kind of stuff, like even in like middle school, high school, there's this like basic idea of like when you're doing the introduction, like paperwork, the essays, you're loosely or very briefly telling the audience what the thesis is going to be or referring to. And now I'm staring at a bunch of circles and lines, with no frame of reference of like, what are we even talking about?
Okay. Does this all look a little familiar? No? Well, then let's keep on going. Okay. What's going on?
There's also like the delayed thesis, but this is a little steep for a learning curve if you're trying to do a delayed thesis on this kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I'm sure a lot of Mathologer regulars will recognize these diagrams and the pretty curve that is starting to materialize. We already encountered these diagrams in the Mathologer video on the times table, the Mandelbrot set, the heart of mathematics. The curve is called the cardioid, the mathematical heart curve. It pops up in mathematics and nature all over the place. For example, it's the curve you get when you roll a circle around another circle of the same diameter, like this. It's also the curve that you often see in cups on sunny days. Okay? And it's the curve that takes center stage in the Mandelbrot set. The Mandelbrot set, there it is. Actually, there's more, much more. Every positive integer does not only give rise to one of these cardioid-infused diagrams, but to a whole family of line diagrams. And a lot of these extra diagrams are also incredibly complex and beautiful. Here are just a few examples. Pretty spectacular, isn't it? It gets even more impressive when you color the segments in the diagrams according to their length. Whoa, not bad, huh? But that's enough pretty pictures. We're on a mission, remember? Our goal is to make sense, mathematical sense, of the vortex, which includes making sense of its mysterious relatives. Interested? Well, why wouldn't it be, right? So let's get going.
Still too slow.
Okay, all the Tesla code videos I mentioned earlier introduce the vortex in essentially the same way. Here we go. Start with the powers of 2. So begin with the number 1, and then every number is double the number before it.
Right,
next,
slow down.
for each number in this table, we calculate its so-called digital root. For this, we keep adding the digits of a number until we end up with a single digit. For example, in the case of 128, the sum of the digits is 1 plus 2 plus 8 is 11.
I'm assuming this is getting towards like sacred geometry, which is, very highly associated with spiritual something, spiritual entities, whatnot, cosmos. I'm just hoping that like this is just a math perspective on sacred geometries.
Now 11 is not a one-digit number yet, and so we keep on going. 1 plus 1 is 2. And so the digital root of 128 is 2. Easy, right? Now let's do this for all the numbers in our sequence. There. Let's string up those digital roots on the circle. First 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, 1, 2, 4, 8, 7. In fact, we'll keep on going like this forever. 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, and so on, over and over. Pretty cute and also pretty surprising, right? Now, instead of doubling, let's look at the sequence we get by halving. Again, starting with 1. 1 half is equal to 0.5, 1 fourth is equal to 0.25, and so on. Let's calculate the digital root of these numbers.
Back to speeding it up.
Looks familiar, right? Let's check what happens on the circle. 1, 5, 7, 8, 4, 2.
Trying to get to the meat of this discussion.
Again, repeating forever and ever after.
This presentation.
Right? Notice, there are 3 numbers that never get visited. 3, 6, and 9. Tesla's 3, 6, and 9. Whoa. At this point of the discussion, the absence of Tesla's 3, 6, and 9 from the cycle is usually interpreted as a telltale sign that we're dealing with some sort of divine message, some secret code, the powerful key to the understanding of the universe that Tesla was raving about. Well, maybe. I have to admit that I'm not quite able to follow the line of reasoning here. However, judging by the zillions of likes these videos attract and the enthusiastic comments, pretty much everybody else watching appears to be in awe and fully on board with what's going on here. Must be just me, I guess. Of course, there's more evidence that the vortex is the key to the universe. Much more. Now we're told to look at what happens when we keep doubling and halving, starting with 3, and evaluating the digital roots of the resulting numbers. There. Whoa, the plot thickens. Both for doubling and halving, the digital roots alternate between 3 and 6. There. 3, 6, 3, 6, 3, 6, and so on. And there. 3, 6, and 3, 6, and 3, 6 again. The alternating 3, 6 then corresponds to a line between those numbers in the diagram. Definitely the key to the universe, right? And what about the 9? At this point in time, the makers of all those videos get really excited.
Man,
we get all 9.
Gotta go.
Amazing. To round things off, it's then also pointed out that a lot of the other famous numbers in maths have digital root 9. For example, 360, 180, 90, 45 degrees. The number 666. This guy here. All those numbers have digital root 9.
Oh, the T-shirt. Okay. This is like a math nerd staring at like sacred geometry spiritualism and going like, is there any, I hope that's the, kind of like conclusion of all this. It's like, is there any validity that I'm, hoping that this guy gets to that point at some,
To the universe. How can it be otherwise? Okay, I can see plenty of you screaming at your computers, trying to get a button. And yes, of course, you're correct. Everything we've seen so far has a fairly simple mathematical explanation, part of which just about everybody has been exposed to in school. An explanation that, by the way, never gets mentioned in Vortex Maths videos. Funny that.
What?
Right. Where in school mathematics do you add digits of a number? Remember? Divisibility tests. If you want to find out whether or not a number is divisible by 9, you just add its digits and check whether this digit sum is divisible by 9. That's how it's usually taught in school. As a refresher, let's do an example. 527. Okay, 5 plus 2 plus 7 is 14, and 14 is not divisible by 9, and so 527 is also not divisible by 9. Well, of course, if that works, then you can repeat adding the digits until only the digital root remains. And then, very simply, a positive integer is divisible by 9. Exactly.
Even faster.
The digital root is 9. Now, example, the digital root
is
5. So the digital root is not 9, and we come to the same conclusion as before.
2.4.
It's not divisible by 9. In school, they usually don't teach this
pretty good.
Rule extension of the standard divisibility test for 9. Of course, they should teach this in school, but they don't.
The video's got to catch up. Uh-oh.
What they should also teach is that if the digital root of a number is
not
like
9,
then this digital root is simply the remainder of that number on division by 9. Nice, huh? So the remainder of 527 on division by 9 is our 5 up there. Great. Now, just out of interest, were any of you out of your land taught this remainder extension in school? Anyway, very much worth knowing and teaching, don't you think? I'll show you the simple proof for all this in a little while, but for the moment, let's keep on going. To explain what's really going on with all that vortex maths, I need to remind you of 2 more super important properties of remainders on division by any number, as well as the digital root's counterpart.
It's interesting that Grok included this channel onto the, like I said, search for intellectuals on YouTube. Obviously, it's, narrowed it down to YouTube, but like that just, what seems like pure academia is getting included.
Those properties in the special case of 9. Nothing scary, really just primary school level maths, promise. What are the properties? Well, the first property is that the remainder of the sum of 2 numbers equals the remainder of the sum of the remainders of the 2 numbers. And the second property is the exact corresponding statement for product of numbers. That's all a bit of a mouthful, but a quick example will make it clear what I mean, and at the same time show you why it works. Okay, let's just stick with division by 9, and let's pick 2 random integers, 527 and 38. Now, 527 is 9 times 58 plus 5, you check this, and therefore, when you divide 527 by 9,
we gotta start skipping. All right, so we're gonna do like, hopefully we get to like chunks where it's like addressing something. So I got the basic like move 10 seconds forward type feature.
It is 9 times 4 plus 8. Well, of course, you can just add the 2 numbers, divide by 9, and this way find them. And the sum is a little bit. For example, not one of the possible
skipping.
The remainder of 1 for us is that the same also divided by 9. We have a foot of the sum or product. Again, summarize the level of remainders, the sum product equals the division by any number. The remainders essentially correspond to the digital roots. Okay, so powers of 2. In green, 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 4 is 8, 2 times 8 is 16, and the digital root of 16 is 1 plus 6 is 7, 2 times 7 is 14, 1 plus 4 is 5, 2 times 5 is 10, 1 plus 0 is 1, and so on. Works. And so looking at it this way, it's actually not such a big surprise that the numbers on the right will eventually repeat. Why? Well, we're always doing the same thing over and over, right? Multiply by 2, followed by finding the digital root, multiply by 2, followed by finding the digital root. And since there are only 9 different possible outcomes of this operation, things are bound to repeat.
Yeah, this is like an atheistic, or secular explanation. As far as I can tell.
Start with any number and keep doubling and digital rooting. Eventually, things are bound to repeat, and from there on, we'll loop forever. Starting with 3, you get a very small loop, 3, 6, 3, 6, 3, 6, and so on. And starting with 9, well, doubling keeps producing numbers divisible by 9, which all have digital root 9. So just the miniest of mini loops in the case of 9. Okay, that's great. Now, what about those halving sequences? They're a bit unusual. In fact, I've never seen anybody calculate the digital roots of decimal fractions before watching these Tesla videos. Having said that,
explanation
of the
digital
same sequence of digital roots as before, running in reverse, right? To get those decimal fractions, we keep dividing by 2 to get 1/2 is equal to 0.5, 1/4 is equal to 0.25, 1/8 is equal to 0.125, and so on. Now, I'm sure that you've all seen these numbers a million times, yes, but did you ever notice the power of 5 come from?
We've got to get to...
Okay, getting there. So as far as mathematics is concerned, the vortex is simply a visualization of what happens when we multiply the remainders divided by 9 by the number 2. In technical lingo, what we're doing here is multiplication by 2 modulo 9. Actually, I almost forgot. If we want to think of the vortex in terms of remainders and not digital roots, we should replace the 9 at the top by 0. Remember that little difference, right? And what about the other diagrams I showed you earlier? Well, those are visualizations of multiplication by 2 modulo other numbers. This diagram for 5 again, right? Just a quick check. There, 4 times 2 equals 8, and when you divide 8 by 5, you get a remainder of 3. Taking those, the number of multiplication by 2. The other diagrams I showed you, you get when you multiply by other numbers. So, for example, have a look at this crazy diagram here. This is multiplication by 240 modulo 7,417. Who would have thought? Now, multiplication modulo different numbers is super important mathematics with myriads of applications within and outside of mathematics, finite fields, cryptographic algorithms, number theory in general, and so on. In an app for drawing these diagrams, we then have 2 basic controls that implements drawing
I think it's getting to the point that, like, you know, saying, oh, you know, the math is a basis of obviously geometry, and oh, you know, there's an explanation for why these kind of patterns, the whatever, similar to like the Fibonacci, you know, golden circle type stuff is, you know, how it makes sense in the very secular, non-spiritual aspect.
If to 50, we get this, and if we now change to multiply to 3, we get this. Actually, on closer inspection, there's at least one more aspect of these diagrams which we could also change. Can you guess what I've got in mind here? It's a tricky one and easily overlooked. I'll give you a hint. It's got to do with the 9 occupying a special role in our discussion so far, right? Only for modulus of 9 have we used the digital root algorithm to construct these diagrams.
I am not double checking any of this math. We're just skipping, we're just blazing right past it.
This does not work for any other diagram. So what exactly is it that makes 9 special in this respect? Well, vortex mathematicians will probably tell you that 9 is special. It's just part of Tesla's 369 being the key to the universe. Of course, 9 has to be special, right? Actually, on close inspection, it turns out that in the first instance, 9 is special because it's direct remainder of 2001. Now, just the sum. But then, okay, but now, well, then
RNG fucking
becomes the special vortex diagram for there.
I can't believe Grok.
It's exactly these connections. For example, starting with the 4, we calculate 2 times 8. 8 in base 8 is 1, 0, and 1 plus 0 is 1. At least from a mathematical point of view, those are diagram for a continuous loop.
I mean, it makes sense. Like, Grok would think like, oh, a math channel, you know, should be included to, like, broadly speaking, you know, intellectual conversations. Like, it's, you know, addressing this kind of, like I said, sacred geometry type, you know, discussions.
Multiplicative group effect, which is of huge importance in mathematics. Okay, so what about the claim that the vortex is the key to the understanding of the universe? Well, today's discussion will really about the sound explanation of the mathematics that comes with the vortex, an explanation that demystifies its supposedly super special properties.
Demystifies,
the vortex is really not as special and amazing as it is made out to be by all those Tesla videos, and that proclaiming it to be the key to the universe mainly based on these properties is simply ridiculous. But of course, you knew it already, didn't you? In fact, I wonder what you now think of all those Tesla videos and their creators. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Having said that, I'm convinced explanation that demystifies its supposed understanding of the universe.
That's what so I was correct.
With these terms, you also recognize that these loops illustrate the fact that for a prime number p, the finite field zp has a cyclic multiplicative group effect, which is of huge importance in mathematics. Okay, so what about the claim?
Now, this is one of these like presentations where, I don't know if you guys seen like the TED videos where it's like, you know, TED, the obviously like the presentation, you know, organization, they've, you know, typically do this kind of like normally very entry level, everybody who shows up or watches the videos can, like, you know, sit down and listen and, like, you know, understand. And then, like, very rarely do they have like a TED, you know, presenter, which is like like presenting the information is not their job. Like, they're literally like a math teacher or, you know, some scientists, and, you know, they're explaining their, you know, thesis or whatever topic it is, but like the average person does not can't keep up. Like, you know, I'm assuming, you know, most of you guys don't necessarily understand like all the math patterns involved. And, you know, he's already like assuming he's got like an audience that understands it. This totally makes sense.
Is the key to the understanding of the universe. Well, today's discussion was really about presenting a sound explanation of the mathematics that comes with the vortex, an explanation that demystifies its supposedly super special properties. I hope that by now it's clear that the vortex is really not as special and amazing as it is made out to be by all those Tesla videos, and that proclaiming it to be the key to the universe mainly based on these properties is simply ridiculous. But of course...
Okay, so that's the delayed thesis. So, you know, the thesis was, oh, hey, this is ridiculous. And then spent 23 minutes out of a 30-minute video getting to that point. So
you knew it already, didn't you? In fact, I wonder what you now think of all those Tesla videos and their creators. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Having said that, I'm convinced that mathematics as a whole is the master key to understanding the universe. And of course, the maths we talked about today is a tiny, tiny part of that key. And if you're fascinated by that tiny, tiny part and are interested in a real understanding of the universe, well then simply familiarize yourself with more and deeper maths. Okay, here's a nice challenge for you suggested by Tristan. Take one of these diagrams, let's just stick with the vortex, multiply the modulus by some integer. Say let's multiply the vortex modulus 9 by 3.
Slow down, skip forward.
What about all these other spectacular model times tables? What is known about the crazy structures inside them? Actually, I've not been able to find much about these. I know of proofs, so when you experiment a little with small multipliers, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these petals appear, and why is it always one fewer petals than the multiplier? Well, the details are base case where we multiply by 2 occurs, so they look like the
skip.
Petals. Of course, zooming out, that's answering this question is an unpublished write-up of the inverse. For keen and capable mathematicians among you, check out Simon Plouffe's write-up and then go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah, not the easiest one YouTube channel to start with, but so, you know, talk to Mathologer. Great. Go back to, so this is the alphabetical. Mathologer is, where is he? M-A-T-H, Mathologer. Great. So, where's the, oh, great. I didn't copy the, all right. So I'll get to this later, but you know, the main point is, okay, we're looking at the stuff, a bunch of options. These are, you know, just ones that I made up to kind of categorized these YouTube channels. And then, let's see. So we got mad scientists. This is like groundbreaking research, you know, doing non-journalistic. So like they're the ones doing the groundbreaking research. Then there's like flat out journalists, which we got like, you know, MSNBC or Fox News or something coming up at some point. Then there's, you know, these kind of armchair spectators where, you know, they're not necessarily journalists. They, you know, kind of they react videos and that type of stuff. Snake oil, that's, you know, this was what the guy was talking about was, you know, the Mathologer guy was like, well, this, you know, people that are popularizing Nikola Tesla as this like somehow like spiritualist cosmic leader is, you know, it's nonsense. It's snake oil. So that he's not the snake oil salesman, that he's addressing the snake oil salesman. Then there's going to be AI slop. Of course, YouTube's going to have plenty of that stuff. We'll see that in the future. Some of it's just pure comedy. Review and react, pencil pusher, nobody. So this would be, you know, Mathologer would be under the category of like, you know, funny enough, journalism. So go back to, let's see, where is that? Mathologer. So just call it journalism. Interesting enough. Conclusion, math, nerd, debunking, debunking a kind of spiritual kind of snake oil. So I'll just copy. Oh yeah, we're going to get to spirit science at some point. That's going to be fun. I'm just going to take this as an example and voila. So that's going to be the high popularity ones. And now we're going to get through, we're going to cancel. All right, we're going to cancel this one. No longer needed from this. Go to the low popularity ones, 1 through 179. So 179, we're going to generate number 35. Who's number 35 of the low popularity? So the defining kind of like threshold was, okay, you know, somebody who's got 50,000 subscribers or higher. This is completely arbitrary. I just chose that number. So 50,000 or higher would, you know, in my regard, be considered like, okay, that's pretty popular. Anybody below 50,000, you know, like I said, completely arbitrary, but I'm going to call low popularity. So what was the number again? 35. Behavioral economics with 5K subscribers. Oh, so Mathologer, you know, would I subscribe? No, this isn't, necessarily my thing. Is he worth subscribing? Yeah, absolutely. I would, say um, that, he's not, again, the criteria was saying like truth value, again, not double checking the math. But we're going to say he's, pretty high truth value, capital T truth, just, he explained the math, succinct and boiled down and brief. No, it dragged for a while. If he was talking to specifically just math nerds, then he's like preaching to the choir essentially. So maybe, the 30 minutes makes sense. If he was talking to not math nerds, the basic public, and trying to get, strangers off the YouTube streets into his channel, it could have been cut down to like 10, 15 minutes at most. Chatability, reasonability. This is an interesting criteria. I mean, like, what are the, if you were to chat with this guy, casual situation, like he seems like a reasonable person. He says, if you asked, oh, can you like dive a little bit deeper into that one point and, kind of explain it to me like I'm an idiot. He seems like, he could do that and willing to do so. And he's probably an actual teacher and, has done that many times. Relatable to the general audience? No, very few people are doing, the kind of staring at circles and, numbers and all that kind of stuff. The thesis, right? We already talked about what are their strongest points, explained his points through math. Did he address the counter arguments? Not really. That would have made his argument stronger within a 15, something minute video. He could have talked about how the counter arguments that, it's what truly magical that there's some sort of Fibonacci sequence and, kind of pattern of life. No, he didn't really address it in, trying to steel man the counter arguments. So, I think we'll skip the Grok summary for this one. But like I said, interesting guy. I would say, if you're into math, continue listening to Mathologer. Mathologer. Well, yeah, I'm probably going to get corrected at some point. Moving on. Let's see. So that's me. And now we are going to behavioral economics. No, YouTube supposed to. Okay, so Grok identified behavioral economics as a topic, and I'm trying to find it as a channel. And Grok said this was a channel, behavioral economics. Okay, let's see what the behavioral economics channel. Oh, I bet it had a hallucination. Behavioral economics channels does not exist. That is unfortunate. There's no way it's one with 7 subscribers and nothing to do with economics. Oh, very little. No, it said 5K. All right, we're skipping to another one. So delete behavioral economics. Yeah, it says 5,000 subscribers. So it's probably hallucination. Okay, RNG again. Between 178. All right, let's see what we got. Number 121. All right. Peter Attia, no channel low. Okay, so, a lot of whatever intellectuals just didn't make a YouTube channel and you can't subscribe to them. But they're, big shots in their own way. So, I did find Peter Attia. Jesus Christ, Grok. All right. So, what does he do? Founder of Early Medical Practice and YouTube freezing again. Oh, Mike. Looks like he focuses. Is that what it is? Are we talking about Peter Attia, MD? I'm going to have to optimize the YouTube stuff. This is freezing up on me. Yeah. Can we? No, everything's frozen. All websites frozen. I think I allocated too much processing power to the streaming instead of anything else. It was holding on to. Oh, this sucks. Wait for one moment for YouTube to figure itself out. Do. Well, this is. Can we? Oh, there it is. Reset itself. Great. Peter Attia is founder of Early Medical Practice that applies principles of medicine 3.0 to patients with goal of simultaneously lengthening their lifespan and increasing their lifespan. So, kind of a medical journalism type thing. Oh, we gotta listen to Mike. That would be, it's an hour. Shoot. That's too long. All right. So as far as I can tell, these are like, probably non-oppositional type discussions people they probably already agree with. And, the basic kind of discussion, whatnot. I know Mike from a different channel. All right. Well, I'm just going to pick something, I guess.
To be lean.
What? 3 hours? I don't know.
So we've talked a lot about radiation. We've touched a little bit on the idea of radiophobia, but does it stem from, nuclear accidents? Is that largely where radiophobia comes from?
I've done a deep dive into this year, which goes along with all.
Voice still going. Nope, and we're stuck again. Wow, this sucks. It's probably my graphics card that can't handle processing all this stuff at the same time. Too many things running. Yep, that's probably it. Okay, we're going to wait for a 6-minute video. Hopefully you can figure yourself out. And then I got homework to figure out how to fix this crap. Let's see. Get an introductory guide to longevity in my weekly newsletter. Watch full episode, Evolving Role of Radiation. Yeah, these like YouTube channels are like pretty popular where, the essentially like the journalistic standpoint that some specialist is focusing on stuff that they understand to be able to have like a dialogue that, is pretty engaging and it asks, good questions. It's not a debate format, which is fine. Ooh. And then,
all these benign cases that I'm treating now. They're essentially arthritis, tendonitis, which we'll talk about. And what's really interesting is that this radiophobia is largely a U.S.-based phenomenon, because the first cases, first of all, X-rays were discovered in 1895 by Röntgen. In 1898, there was the first case described of actually radiating both arthritis type things, or ankylosing spondylitis or other arthritides, and also tumors. Even back then, we had no idea how it worked, but there were cases pre-1900 that were already being used for that. And then in the subsequent now 120 plus years, we have this divergence where Germany and the UK are using, and all of Europe really, are using radiation routinely for arthritis and tendonitis. But in the US, it seems to be a basic, there was a lot of it was nuclear phobia, the Cold War, like you mentioned. But another thing that's been talked about, there's a guy named Jason Beckta that has a really good podcast on the subject. He's out of Vermont. Standard Oil, the Rockefellers and all, actually had a massive lobby group that were actually actively promoting oil over nuclear power plants. And the amount of spread went from just an energy industry to just the general zeitgeist of our entire country. And so at that time, the radiophobia just caught on, and it was, of course, bolstered by World War II and seeing what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then on top of that, you probably heard about the radium dial workers. There was a movie, it's called The Radium Girls. These are essentially women in the 1920s that were using radioluminescent phosphorus paint to paint the watches.
Watch dials, yeah.
Being a watch guy, you'll probably appreciate that. But that was the only source of illumination they had. So in order to keep the brushes very fine, they were literally dipping it in the radium paint, and then after each brush, they were licking the brush to keep the tip real fine. And so they were ingesting bits of radium. And so there were...
I mean, the insane stories of, like, the whatever, mercury or lead in top hats, and, like the thalidomide babies and all that kind of stuff, where it's like, these are clearly, in hindsight, terrible ideas. But at the time, they just, they didn't have the, knowledge. So I don't know if a Geiger counter existed back then, but
were a number of cases with
shit that glows, unless it's bioluminescence, probably shouldn't be touched, and it probably gives off heat. Probably a few things that should have been, a red flag.
They ended up getting, the radium is metabolized like calcium, so it was actually incorporating into the mandible, and they were getting osteoradionecrosis of the jaw and things like that. So all of these different phenomena kind of added together became a big deal, because prior to that, people were using radiation for all kinds of crazy things. It was in suntan lotions and waters, and there was something called vigoridine that they were using for ED, that you could topical salves that had radiation in them. There was literally no end to it. And then when all this sequela started,
you say ED, like erectile dysfunction? That's insane.
To come out that, hey, maybe this isn't such a good idea, that's when things took off. But now that we look back, the reality of it is that a lot of that was really overblown, even so much so that those radium dial painters, which we hear about this from day one in our residency training, there was only a small percentage, like I think 50 out of 1,500 roughly, that actually had toxic sequela. So most of them didn't.
Is there a way to quantify how much exposure they had to radiation?
And that's the thing, they've looked at different ways, but there have been some basic ideas. It was, again, we're talking about, it was probably, at that era, it was probably a couple of millisieverts to that particular area, but it was daily for decades.
Yep.
And so part of the reason why if you actually look at the numbers, it was probably a super high exposure, but when you spread that out over such a long period of time, that's sort of the general trend, like I mentioned earlier. It's not just the dose, it's the dose over time. It's, the denominator matters a lot. And so that's why most of them actually did very well. They even used to use radium internal nasal applications in the 1920s and 1940s, essentially a radiation equivalent of a tonsillectomy or adenoidectomy. And it was done in something like 500,000 to 2 million children in the US and even in the armed forces. It was done routinely back then. And there's been very few adverse sequelae that were reported. I don't even know what the dose was, but it was high. So there's a lot of cases where the exposure based on our 50 millisievert rule we talked about would just make people fall out of their chair. But the actual reality of it is that many times the actual end results aren't.
I mean, it'd be great if this was more of a debate format, but like, as far as I can tell, this guy's telling the truth. And so, from Peter Attia's standpoint, it's like, well, there's no point in like interrupting or, have a counter argument, I guess.
As bad as we'd expected.
Again, hearing you say this, Sanjay, the listeners are going to be thinking, what?
Yes.
Because we're all so brainwashed into believing that radiation is horrible.
Right. I can tell you so many stories. I got patients who I've had to treat. I actually had a guy who was involved in nuclear testing.
Yeah, so there's right now there's the nuclear reactors kind of debate where it's the uranium or plutonium. It's mostly uranium. I think it's 238 or 235, one of the two. That say there's some legitimate concerns, and then it doesn't it produces a lot of energy, but some countries and nations said, hey, we're not going to, deal with this. It's too scary. The Japanese Fukushima Daiichi stuff, Manhattan projects, was it was it 3 Mile Island nuclear accident? Yeah. So like, or Ukraine's, what am I stalling on the big, I'm having a brain fart moment. Nuclear accident, Chernobyl, of course. So we're staring at like, and the Chernobyl little like TV show everyone should watch that. It is absolutely frightening. And, the point of the TV show towards the end was like talking about why or how was it a danger? It got various safety protocols were being skipped, and um, various people that were pushing the limits, thinking that there was going to be a safeguard. It wasn't a safeguard. The boron tip stuff, very interesting story. Everyone should watch the TV show. And so, Chernobyl was what, only 30, 40 years ago? People are still, that lived through it are still alive to tell the tale. And yeah, it's still to this day a huge problem that all the extra funding that should have gone towards like safety measures weren't done. And, it can be a extremely bad situation. And then there's interesting documentaries, of scientists now, or, for the last however many years, pushing the thorium molten salt reactors, saying, okay, we understand, that there's fears about nuclear reactors exploding, etc. But technology improves and we can make systems that are a lot smarter, a lot more safeguards, etc., that would be a lot better than the alternatives of, there's issues with solar panels and the type of, rare earth metals and minerals and whatnot that are getting harder and harder to mine. There's a lot of open pit mining. There's nothing renewable about, the solar panel production itself, right? That solar energy, we can call it renewable energies, but there is a lot of issues with the kind of, energy alternatives. There's still people doing coal and, burning all sorts of stuff. And even hydroelectric dams, there's a lot of problems because, if you take an existing river and then you just put a dam for the sake of, generating the water pressure to spin the turbines, now everything that was depending on that river, to flow is no longer flowing that much. So there's like, fish and wildlife being disrupted. So, I'm assuming that this video is kind of slowly getting to the point of like, maybe we should rethink radioactive materials, and that it can be safe if done correctly, and we didn't, cheapen out on materials. So let's see.
At Los Alamos in the 1940s. He's passed away now, but I saw him in his 80s, so this was in the early 2000s. This was 60 years after that. They had very little monitoring back then, but he was close enough to feel the heat from a thermonuclear bomb. And by the time I saw him, he had thyroid cancer, as you would expect. He'd had 1 or 2 lymphomas. I think I ended up treating his prostate. So he'd had at least 4 or 5 different malignancies, but the guy was as functional as most 80-year-olds are. The guy was still walking and talking and doing just fine. And it actually seems that when you look at the population studies that were done outside the blast at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when of course you get the initial concentration, everyone dies from the thermonuclear energy. But as you get several miles out, not only are the cancer rates actually roughly the same as the background, you actually see again evidence of hormesis, where you have some patients in whom, or maybe not hormesis, but some sort of radioprotection, where you actually have lower rates of leukemia and thyroid cancer when you get a few miles farther out than you did in the general population. So it's all very much dose dependent, time dependent, but I think the human body, we're evolved really to handle this to a larger degree than we realize, because again, mammalian DNA, we came from, the background of the animal kingdom where there was tons of exposure from natural cosmic rays and whatnot, and our predecessors had to be able to survive. Our DNA had to be somewhat resilient in order to get to this point. I think it's more resilient than a lot of people give it credit for.
Okay, so yeah, pretty much. I'm assuming if the video continues to the full episode, it would have, gone to that conclusion of like, we should rethink that radiation is not entirely scary. Obviously, there's stuff every day that people get exposed to, like the sun, UVB, etc., where it's actually necessary for survival. It's like you can't, if you try to remove it from your life completely, that you'll be weaker because of it. So yeah, YouTube channel review. yeah, this is what, like I said, a medical professional trying to do this kind of chat journalism, very not aggressive, not intended to be, and that, um, was it succinct? Sure. Is it, chatability? Yeah, I think, as far as I can tell, there wasn't much exposure, but, it's pretty open ended. Um, let's see, what's the next one? Relatable for the general audience. Yeah, I think it's designed, the videos are designed, or the topics are designed to be digestible. And then you got, people in the comment section, oh, pure nonsense. Oh no. Somebody was not happy about talking about radiation. Yeah, radiophobia is completely artificial. Right-wing big business and left-wing anti-growth lobbyists have propagandized the public. And the response to their own comment, blah, blah, blah. So, nothing too esoteric. Did they address the counter arguments? No, I mean, I don't think that's how the videos are ever set up to do that. So, is it worth subscribing? If you're in the medical field, that you just kind of want, I don't know, it's the equivalent of like journalism junk food, where you're just like, you can subscribe and like mindlessly consume. Like, it's not directed towards any one thing. Like, obviously he's just covering a bunch of stuff, and like I said, there might be a long running thesis of like, worried about health and medicine or something, but that's pretty much every doctor ever, focuses on. So yeah, if you're concerned about health, I guess, would I subscribe? No. Yeah. So getting back to, what is it? Peter Attia. Okay, let's skip that. Just basic journalist. And it's the example that I pulled from.
So we talked a lot about radiation.
Yes. Okay. So we're going to copy that, paste that, and example. There's the example. All right. I still got to clean this up. All right. So we're going to be done with YouTube channel review stuff. In the near future, we're going to be looking at like political ideologies and kind of deconstruct and then reconstruct political beliefs. So I've got a list of various things. The thing that I wanted to cover today was the idea, at least, as a kind of introductory topic for the sake of further future discussions. So my kind of mad scientist contribution is the idea of rethinking political spectrums. Ooh, that looks pretty bad. So rethinking political spectrums, where wasn't really happy with the kind of left-right divide, or the kind of dichotomy. So let's see, what's right. So like, here's a good intro. So, there's websites galore to try to explain political ideologies, and, this is nothing too significant, but, and this is in the context of United States, that people have this idea of left wing means this, right wing means that. And it's, you can see how it doesn't really make sense. Like, so like internal consistency wise doesn't make sense. So this is a decent representation of what people think left and right represent, like from a political party perspective. And so this is going to be a little hard to see. Can we zoom in better? Oop, that's too much zoom in. All right. So whoever, designed this, I think not necessarily is biased. I think they're just saying, here's what people, associate the ideas with. And so, the left is, funny enough, little side note, if you ask a left-wing person which political party is like secretly in charge or like more in charge, federal, global, whatever you want to call it, would say left wing would say, the right's really in charge. Even if there was a left wing president, now the Senate, House of Representatives, everything was completely left wing. Left wing person on average would still say, the right, secretly in charge. And then the same thing, if you talk to a right wing person, he says, who's really running the show, and be like, it's the left wing people. And so, it's an interesting kind of like, everyone thinks that they're the underdog, right? Regardless of who, the actual president and the political affiliations are. So, let's dive into, these common kind of associations. The left, one can see. So we're talking about, that is as big as it gets. All right. So left-wing associations, communist, labor, Democrats, parties. Their principles, looks like the kind of Roman, column symbolism. Progressive nature, looks to the future. Egalitarian, idealism, equality. So like these are like, basic TV advertising terms that, it's pretty common to see. Belief in fair trade, support the workers, goal of personal freedom, in contrast with the right wing, the economic freedom. The focus is on society, which, that's kind of a lukewarm argument to make. And then they like to interfere with society and social lives. And then the Republicans or right wing don't interfere with society and social lives. Okay. Regulated economy, business and industry, tax and spend. Let's see, social progress, evolution, blah, blah, blah. Community based on ethics, society and culture. World can be improved. Utopianism. Contrasting with like preservation, the world is fine as it is. Like, it's at least the, steel manning the right wing argument would be like, it's not necessarily that the world is fine as it is that the alternative to a free market system of the left wing, not free market system, is, the higher taxation, more social programs, more coerced regulatory entities. And so the right wing's like, well, we'll just keep it as it is, so, left wing, let's see, community based on ethics and morals. If you take like a intro philosophy 101 class, right, you get into this like, deconstruction of words, and you get to the point where ethics and morals don't really have distinct definitions. So like if you're like really, really boiled it down, what does it mean to, what's the term ethics mean and what the term morals mean? You can still boil it down to the same thing of like, morals and ethics require a goal of some type, a standard of some type to adhere to. So ethics has been used to be like, again, already like left leaning of like, it should be about social fairness. And that's how like ethics has been defined. And then morals somehow has been like, kind of associated with individual aspirations, not social aspirations or standards. So once you take, that kind of intro to, philosophy 101 class, like you can use them interchangeably because you still need the context of what that aspiration or standard or goal is to then have that discussion about like the trolley, type thing of like, do you save the one person stuck to the train tracks, or do you save the entire trolley that's filled with 20 people? Then you can then have a discussion about the kind of utilitarian, non-utilitarian. Is it better to save a bunch of people versus is it better to save one person, depending on the circumstances? So don't get stuck that like somehow ethics has to mean something different than morals. It honestly doesn't have to. Let's see, the left-wing perspective on family versus versus right wing. Okay, so the left wing is nurturing love, and then the right wing is tough love. So that the strict parent versus the nurturing parent, which liberalism, if associated with left wing, not libertarian for whatever reason. We're not going to get in there today, but that let the child do whatever the child wants to do versus strict parent. You better do what I say, type of parenting. It creates potential, which I don't know what that means in the left-wing context even. Create potential, blah, 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 turns the child into an adult, and the adult is going to focus on media architecture, become a professor, a scientist, a teacher in an urban environment. These are like wild stereotyping. So compared to the right-wing adult, so the left wing was more social sciences. Oh no, they just flat out they claimed all of science. And then the right wing is honestly the kind of dumber professions, police, military, stockbroker, needs some intelligence. Sales, judges, just more cutthroat. And then judges are just, stricter, I guess. So we could go on and on, but the whole point is like I didn't necessarily like the way that this whole like left-right divide has been set up. Obviously, it's like the kind of BMI type discussion where it's like BMI is body mass index. You're putting in 2 points of information to spit out, whether or not you're fat or not, and obviously it doesn't even include muscle mass. So like for what it does, it's very efficient. Of like, it doesn't require 20 points of information to output whether or not you're fat, right? But that's the BMI number you get out of it should be in the context holistically of like it doesn't include a lot of information. Like if you don't have legs, your BMI index is going to go a lot higher. If you're a bodybuilder, it's not going to include that. He just says, the Hafthor Bjornsson and Eddie Hall and, those guys are all morbidly obese that, they'd be off the charts. And, their actual body fat percentage is, relatively speaking, normal. So my kind of, trying to break ground is this idea of like not to the same to the full extent of like this is going to explain politics or something like that, but to the idea that the kind of left right stuff is not accurate enough, and then by adding a second spectrum, it's getting a little bit more depth, but it's not going to explain society. But at least this graph is going to be used as kind of the jumping board to talk about future political topics. So at least and this is adjust your eyes, this is going to be jarring for some people, but we're going to put this direction of left-right, not following contemporary U.S. politics, but just a whole new paradigm of thinking. But so we're going to do like liberal and social. So, this would be more the individual. And then this is a group of people. And they have a bunch of dicks, apparently, because I can't fucking draw on this thing. It goes do. So this idea of like, yes, this would be the liberal gets put into the same camp as libertarian. And just, hear me out for a moment. And that social is that you're less likely to make individual choices. You have to follow what the group, is wanting to do. So roughly speaking, like welfare, obviously, with higher taxation would lean towards more social stuff. And then libertarian, again, we're just putting this in big, broad terms, that the liberal is focusing on more on free markets and individual choice. That they're making their own decisions, they can start their own business, they can make individual transactions, there's less regulations, etc. So just talking about the spectrum, this is, the one axis. And then, this is a classic graph of obviously like an XY thing. But, you've seen the 2D spectrums. So this is the same structure. The difference is that the top, so this new spectrum, and hopefully this is easily to translate, is non-opposition. So this could also mean totalitarian, or authoritarian. So the other spectrum, the other end of this spectrum would be adversarial. Oops. Uh-oh. What did I do? Adversarial. Oh, it changed everything. Okay, this sucks. All right. Adversarial. So this is not necessarily economics or not necessarily politics, but as an example, if we're talking about politics, that a totalitarian government regime, or what do you want to call it, is not going to have opposition. They control everything. And then adversarial would be like the US democracy. Technically, if we want, the people wanted to overthrow the existing government, they can be an adversary and to then, vote for a new president. And there is, an opposition. It is adversarial in its nature. So, for example, North Korea, in this, just talking about the kind of, totalitarian, non-oppositional, adversarial spectrum, North Korea is obviously very high on this kind of system. There is no, system to overthrow. It's not built into the system to overthrow Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung, that, the Kim dynasty, right? There's no, technically Democratic Republic People Korea, DPRK, they might call themselves Democrats, but obviously, as soon as there's an adversary, they're either getting sent to a concentration camp or just killed on the streets. And then if you go, down towards here with the adversarial, if you say anything in, the United States is, I don't like the president, that's fine. You have freedom of speech. And, unless you say something like you wanted to kill the guy, that's going to cause issues. But if he just says, I don't like him, that's fine in the United States. So, you know, in the left to right system of, let's say, North Korea, as an example, individual choice not really respected. You can't start your own business. You can't even technically um, like pick your job. So you grow. You get born, child, teenager, and then you're essentially, I believe, and I could be corrected, that you're given the job that your parents had. And of course, there's also the part of like, if your parents did something bad, now you get continued to be punished for it. So North Korea is way over here on the social spectrum of like, whatever the group says goes. Obviously, the group is then decided by a authoritarian, totalitarian regime. So North Korea would live right around there on the extreme of high non-oppositional, totalitarian, very little liberties. So it goes way over here, and a lot of social decisions, technically speaking, decided by, the oligarch slash one guy, or the monarchy. So, North Korea. Then USA, roughly speaking, for as much as people complain about it, is not this like extreme totalitarian system. If you wanted to oppose the government, you can. If you wanted to, do a lot of stuff, is pretty much allowed. So, US starts to live around the kind of, more towards adversarial. And then, of course, I'm in my own way. There it is. So, the US is on, not necessarily have I defined neutral yet, which would have, been great. But for as much as the welfare systems exist, there's a lot of liberal choices, even compared to whatever United Kingdom, much more liberal. And it's a lot easier to, start a business, do your thing, etc. So roughly speaking, it's not extreme at the left bottom, but very easily US lives around here on the spectrum. So I think it's going to be possible to have many discussions in the future about political ideologies following this spectrum, this 2D compass. And yeah, it has I would say it has more potential, that now you can have a discussion about like whatever anarchy and libertarianism, if it's as kind of a succinct political ideology, and then what does it mean to live here, what does it mean to live there, etc. So that's going to be it for my stream today. Apologize for all the crappy buffering or video graphics card issues, but hopefully, it's something to chew on, something to think about. And then, yeah, in the future, we're going to be talking about more YouTube channels, deconstructing so-called intellectuals and what do they kind of frame themselves. And then for sure, talking about political ideologies and deconstruction. What does it mean for anarchism? What does it mean for communism? What does it mean for democracy, capitalism, etc.? Like these various terms that are used every day. And fascism is the pop the pop term, the popular term. Everyone's calling each other fascists. And so what does it mean? Briefly, potentially talk about the actual history, and then really breaking down of like, okay, two people are pointing fingers at each other, say, you're the fascist, and see, okay, who's more correct, based on not each person's feeling, but like a little bit of history, a little bit of etymology, the kind of origin of the words, even just the deconstruction of the word itself. And then, does it even make sense to use it in the modern context? Talk about totalitarianism. There's a good chunk of that stuff. So, if you're interested in more of this kind of, brutal honesty, deconstruction, reconstruction of ideas, please subscribe and, comment. I'll try to answer whatever questions seem reasonable. If you just start, throwing like name calling around, that's just, it's not going to affect me in any sense. A lot tougher skin than that. Ideally, if you're going to ask a question, it's pretty straightforward. And then, if it's just some bullshit like, he's got a goofy hair and nose and type stuff, there's no point in engaging with that. So, at some point, it'd be, interesting to have kind of a live discussion collaboration with, these YouTube channels that I'm obviously trying to explore. Some, all these people, there's like 400 and funny enough, that's what Grok was saying, like in all of, again, focused on YouTube, in all of YouTube and the whatever, hundreds of thousands of channels exist. And then I asked, okay, so how many are like, intellectual? How many are smart? How many is trying to explain something, and it fit in that criteria? It said like, 500 something. It's like, okay, it seems pretty low. Like this list is not that long. If I get through 2 per, stream session video, whatever, it's going to take me a while. But I was thinking like there would be like thousands, and, the pursuit of intellectualism in one way or another, either through math or medicine or whatever it's going to be, like the list is pretty small. So like if you are on this list or, interested in, most of this stuff, you are at, it's not even the 99th like percentile or, the top 1%. You're the top 1% of 1% of 1%. That's, the rest of society is, don't give a fuck, doesn't give a shit. No fucks given of like, they're just trying to get through their day, drink beer, go to sleep, etc., and repeat. So hopefully you'll join me on this journey that I'm going through, and, trying to get my shit together of producing this stuff, because I've been, kind of chewing on this stuff for multiple years. So see you later.